Hello, I'm Patrick Abbott, author of the Fallen series and Savannah Paranormal Detective Agency, and today I have Michael Barros. Michael, how are you, sir?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Doing well, thank you, on this rainy day in DC. So, the most important question: what's going to make this interview interesting for listeners?
Well, there's a good chance it's not interesting. I think I'm
Oh,
a
yeah,
mildly interesting.
you got to sell yourself.
I'm a mildly interesting guy. Hopefully it is we have some rapport and some good banter, but I think that it's just that we're talking about an innately interesting topic, which is religion in fiction. And I find that innately interesting. Hopefully somebody else does too.
And I hope our listeners do as well. So, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah. So I have a background in education. I mean, as you know, I started out in the Air Force and I taught a little bit over there. It was satellite systems operations, so very much in the STEM world. And I kind of spent most of my early career doing STEM stuff. So I left the Air Force. I was an ops engineer, systems engineer. I got kind of sick of the corporate world, so I moved out to Oregon and was living in my buddy's garage while he owned a construction company. So we were doing roofing. And then for a couple reasons, things didn't quite work out. So move out to I move out to Idaho, and in that interim period while I was still living there, my girlfriend had moved from Colorado to Idaho, and so we had and this kind of we'll get into like why I'm into religion in the first place. I was just listening to audiobooks. I would drive over there every week, and it's a 5 hour drive from Central Oregon to Boise, and I would listen to the audio Bible for the most part. I went through a few audios, but I would just listen to the audio Bible on like two times speed. And so, as a result of doing that every weekend, you just go through the Bible back to back several times. And so, eventually, move out to Idaho. I'm working in a factory, and I'm just got really in audio books. I expanded beyond the just the Bible. I started to get into the classics, and I was working in a factory. I got hired as an engineer, but they said, "Hey, just do a month as an electrician." And then they just kind of forgot about me on the floor for a few reasons.
Of
Like,
course.
so I just became an electrician for a while, but I was listening to audiobooks in my headphones, getting an education that I was reading at home. And so throughout that process, I decided to get my master's in biblical and theological studies. And eventually that got me hired as a teacher. And then bing, bang, boom. Eventually, I was teaching for the next several years in the humanities department at Boise Classical Academy. There, I got a job as an adjunct at University of the People, where I teach philosophy. And currently, I am a PhD candidate in psychology, specifically focused on the cognitive science of religion. I'm do research in Dr. McNamara's lab on various topics within the cognitive science of religion. That was long-winded. I apologize, but
No, no, not long-winded at all. On one hand, I want to say, yeah, Audible has me too, and I get my education from Audible. I have
yeah.
way too many Civil War and Revolutionary War books, and I'm sure Amazon loves me for that. But
Hmm.
especially, I've driven around the Dakotas, Nebraska, Kansas. That's my old stomping ground. So I definitely know about
Yeah.
the road trips and audiobooks. But I want to say that's a very interesting background. You start off in STEM in the Air Force, and
Mhm.
Air Force, as any person in the military will tell you, them's the smart ones. And so, what made you, besides just listening to the Bible, what made you go from what people would think are diametrically opposed things of hard STEM and then the softer psychology of religion and also religion itself?
Yeah, so psychology, interestingly enough, before I joined the Air Force, I was interested in psychology when I was at St. Pete College, and I was a really bad student, and so my major was psychology, and then I switched it to engineering, like for like last minute, and then within a few months, I was already going to the Air Force. So I always had an interest in psychology as a teenager, but really the thing that made me more interested in like the softer side, the humane side, and religion specifically. Um, was and hopefully my parents aren't watching. It was as soon as I left the Air Force, like the day my my leaving the Air Force party, I forget what you call it, not my separation party, whatever. We went to
Liberation Day.
dinner. Yeah. And this fella, and I won't say who, he said, "Hey man, you have you ever done psychedelics?" And I was like, No, to me that was like a crazy thing. And so we started to hang out more now that I was out. I think he just thought, yeah, he's out. He seems like the kind of guy who wouldn't snitch on me. He was still in, and he had a crazy, crazy setup. Like if any cop ever went to his, he would have been kicked out of the military and arrested. It was like a full blown growing station for mushrooms, but he also had every type of psychedelic in the world. So I just started to do psychedelics. I got really into New Age. At that time, I was more or less agnostic. I wouldn't say atheist, just because sometimes I would argue with atheists to be a jerk, but I was basically an atheist. Yeah, it's like this internally, you just conflict all the time. If you're kind of a so I was just doing a bunch of psychedelics. I mean, not every weekend, but there were some weekends where I would go multiple times in a weekend. And I got really into kind of new age stuff. And I had already, as a teen, been super into UFOs and stuff. And so it's kind of a natural fit when you get into like the Gaia community. I don't know if you follow. Yeah, so it was
I
kind of a natural slide there.
Yeah, I've in my studies, there's that New Age connection, almost going back to theosophy with UFOs.
Exactly. And so it sort of naturally grew out of that. I was super into UFOs in the Air Force. And so I kind of moved into the new age stuff. I would, do all sorts of rituals. I kind of just I would go to haunted houses. I would do seances. I went to a handful of like Wiccan covens. I would just kind of go all around town doing whatever. I mean, New Age is very big, but a lot of it was just basically explicitly Western occult things, and I would pray to Thoth and things like that, and I would read the Bible too. And I was into Jesus, but it was like I read it as like a wisdom text, so that was kind of my interest there. And obviously, eventually, I would become a Christian, and then eventually became a Catholic.
So this is our first Joe Rogan episode, I guess, on the Substack. No machine elves or anything like that, right? Or did you anything you want to share on that end, or no?
No, no, I never did. I never had DMT work. I smoked DMT one time, and I didn't what had they call breakthrough. And I remember I was with my friends, and they said, "Here, you smoke this," and I nothing. So they said, "Smoke it, try it again, just quicker or whatever." And I started to hear the ringing. I remember looking at them. They're like, "Oh," because they thought I was breaking through, but it never happened for me. Every other drug did, but for whatever reason. And I took it as like a spiritual sign, like you're not ready for the wisdom that DMT has to offer you. So DMT never worked for me.
Well, don't do drugs, kids. So you
Yeah.
definitely had a very arc of a religious experience. What specifically about Christianity and Catholicism made you want to study that as a not only I'm not trying to put down the devotional side, but as a topic worthy of study?
Um, for me, it was sort of have you seen that graphic where it has the internal self-references of the Bible and it's like just thousands and thousands of lines?
Yes, and I
Um,
will include that in the post.
yeah, so it's that sort of concept. I didn't see that graphic for a while, but it was that sort of concept. It was just the density of it. So again, I was reading the Bible as a wisdom text, and it just felt as though if you're reading various wisdom texts to include, the Emerald Tablets of Hermes or something like that, the Kabbalion, whatever, you there seems to be like a density or a concentration of wisdom that seemed to be the most dense within the Bible. Um, and and then eventually that would lead to the idea for me that it was the most true, but not the only true. And then eventually I would accept that there were exclusive claims within the Bible. And so that's kind of where that came from. So I more or less said, well, if this is the most true and there's exclusivity claims, as much as I really enjoy the other stuff, I don't think I should probably be praying to Thoth anymore. So,
Uh, the road to wisdom. There are
yeah.
many roads to the cross, as they say, and good for you on that end. So, and this is where we go from sort of the real world to the more fictional side of things. When we first virtually met, we bonded over Morrowind, which, besides being the best Elder Scrolls game ever, what makes Morrowind so unique to you?
Man, it's everything. Well, it's a completely alien world. If you go to, Cyrodiil, you can say, okay, this is classic high fantasy. Skyrim, you go, yeah, I mean, I'm definitely seeing a lot of Nordic influence here, and they're even called the Norse. You go to Morrowind, you go, what is this place? I mean, you've got floating things, niches floating through the air with long, like tendril-like things. There's ash everywhere, a very gray aesthetic. There's this extraordinarily complex political system. The denizens themselves are dark elves, but they're portrayed differently than dark elves in a lot of fictional representations. And it's it felt like a very lived in, authentic culture that was wholly different than any parallel I could see in the real world, even if it has some roots in there. So that for me is, I mean, I'd be curious what your take is on that.
So I definitely see what you mean because when you think about high fantasy, you have the Lord of the Rings and all its spin-offs, which just because they're so popular are no longer foreign. And it's a
Mhm.
fancy version of Europe. And other elements like Skyrim, it's Viking Town. You put on the Northman when you play. With
Yeah.
Morrowind, for people who haven't played it, it's exactly right. There were creatures right away just kind of floating in the background that my brother and I would yell, "What is that?"
Yeah.
The concept of knighthood really isn't in there. There's the empire, which is like the Roman Empire, but it's only in the very big cities. And even in the big cities, it's minority culture. And it's, I think, the first game ever that was racist to me because the moment you get off the boat into the backwater dark elf community, that's really a diminutive, rundown race, they call you Enwa and they call
Yeah.
you Outlander. And at first, with Outlander, you think, oh, they're impressed that I'm from far away, and it's like, no, they legitimately hate me just because I'm different. And
Yeah.
it's sort of that combination of alienness and also the realism of this is how it would play out. I, the concept of slavery in the game is a universal thing, and it's something you have to maneuver around, even with modern day sensibilities. It's this is the culture here, and the only way to break that is to even break the culture further. And so, it's definitely a unique game, and especially for people who like the Dagoth Ur memes, especially with Joe Rogan, they would get an
Yeah.
insight into the religion element. But how does religion play a role in Morrowind?
Well, it's central, and for me, it's the most interesting part of it, because it's from like Vivek and Dagoth are probably the most interesting characters in all of Elder Scrolls. Um, the I think a lot of people feel similarly. So it's, I mean, the origin of the the Dunmer as a people who have ash gray skin and red eyes comes from a curse from the goddess Azora. And so the religious elements are embedded right in. And this is an interesting thing because I remember that the YouTube channel Religion for Breakfast, he talked about what makes fictional worlds with religion feel inauthentic. And I think he even referenced the Elder Scrolls. He said, there's sort of a diversity of opinion, and you can see like the development of religious ideas, whereas a lot of fictional worlds represented as relatively monolithic and clear cut. And I think, and he referenced the Elder Scrolls as not a good example, but as a bad example, if I recall correctly. In my opinion, that's exactly wrong. And the Morrowind is a really good way of thinking about that because you have differing accounts of the origin of the deities. Did the tribunal betray Nerevar? Um, Vivek seems to, after the fact, rewrite his own origin story to make it so he had a divine birth. And you can't necessarily say that he's wrong because he was born of a mortal woman. And then you have Sothosil and Amalexia, evidently, in the 36 Lessons of Vivek, going back and saying, and basically saying, you were going to give birth to my brother sister. And you go, well, they were contemporaries of Vivek, so that's not true. They gained their divinity after interacting with the Heart of Lorkhan way later. But then you go, well, hang on. If he achieved Kim, which is, the divine syllable, then you can essentially rewrite the past so that it was always that way. So in his transcendence, he could have rewritten uh his own history. And we go, that's paradoxical. And is that true? Is he lying about it? Sofa Sill seems to indicate, well, he wants to be in Elder Scrolls Online. Sofa Sill says he wants to be everything to everyone, all races, all genders. And there's an implication. He wants to be divinely or have a divine origin. He's a poet. Uh, so is it true? Is it not true? Dagoth Ur presents the alternate perspective on that. So it's just this extremely, I mean, the religion is all throughout it, but it's complex and it's at times contradictory. And so I think that it's yes, I could keep talking about Elder Scrolls religion forever because I think it's just so interesting. But yeah, that's that.
So let's play with that a little bit. Keeping talking of Elder Scroll religion. How does the religion affect the game world besides the main characters? How does it play out in the culture? How does it play out with the secondary characters?
Yeah, I think that throughout all the Elder Scrolls games, there's interactions with religious structures, right? So you interact with the nine in Oblivion. It's the eight in Skyrim, and there's obviously the huge problem that um, the High Elves have with Talos being considered a divinity. Within Morrowind, all of these things are still present in the background, right? The origin of the Dunmer being the Chimer, who were an offshoot of the Aldmer, or the Altmer, who are their descendants would be the High Elves. They are they, their idea behind wanting to essentially dominate the world is not simply that they have a desire for power; it's that they believe they have divine origin. So, kind of the big bad throughout the Elder Scrolls series is the High Elves, but they believe they have a divine origin, so they want to unmake the world. So, a lot of their political scheming is them trying to find a way to destroy this mortal world so it collapses and they can return to their divine origins. The Battle of Red Mountain, which is huge as far as the history of Morrowind goes, it was essentially when finally the first council split, and then you end up having the battle between the Dwemer and the Dunmer or the Chimer. It was because of the blasphemies of the dwarves. They had built Numidium using the heart of Lorkhan, trying to make a material god, and the idea would be that they could transcend, they could, grab at the heavens, and this was so blasphemous that it sundered the alliance of the dwarves and the Dunmer. And so that's kind of built right in. You start to see, um, and sorry, you asked about the individual citizens. I'm talking about like the high lore stuff,
It's all good.
but
It's all good. We can come around.
it's embedded because that's the idea behind the structure that like is at the heart of the plot of Morrowind, the tribunal. You have all of that in the background, the Battle of Red Mountain in the background, how they achieve their divine power in the background. Are they true gods? They consider themselves living gods. You get to interact with living gods. And so you start to see, well, the average citizen is saying, if they're on, uh, if do I worship these living gods or do I worship the old good Daedra, Azura, Mafal, and Boethia? And you, as the player, are going around. But you achieving the prophecy of the Nerevarine, you're a reincarnation of Nerevar, but you're sent by Azora herself. So you're essentially coming and saying, I'm going to disrupt the religious structure right now where there is living gods to bring back the old religious way um, that was prior to that. And even though you guys are kind of living in a golden age right now, because there is a huge spiritual threat, which is Dagoth Ur, that even the living gods are perhaps not able to contend with. It's spreading plague and disease, and so it's the most. I think it's the most explicitly religious of the Elder Scrolls games, but I actually I mean, Oblivion's literally about like hell coming into the mundane world. So I guess maybe not. But it feels as though like the interactions between different religious groups are extraordinarily central to Morrowind.
Yeah, there's a good diversity, I think, in Morrowind because you have the majority, you have the Empire, you have the other races as well. With Skyrim, it's the Nordtown, and oh, there might be a little sect there. With
Yeah.
Oblivion, it's in central Italy. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
But on that note, how does the work and depth and importance of religion in Morrowind differ from other works of fiction outside of Elder Scrolls?
So I think it's for me it's just there's depth and novelty to it. Um it seems like they really took risks. I mean, and the fans know this. Michael Kirkbride, he used to work. He wrote a lot of the lore for Morrowind. He no longer works with Outer Scrolls, but a lot of his subsequent work, blog, respond to people on Reddit and blog posts, people consider like canon adjacent or roughly canonical interpretations of the lore. And he had just such a unique mind, and so. uh, he would or Morrowind itself took a lot of risks in exploration. I mean, you have um the introduction of very novel ideas that I think people interact with and find compelling. And I don't know that everybody understands why, because it took me a long time to figure out why am I so interested in this idea of not Dagoth. Well, he's interesting. He's got a deep voice. He's cool. He's a cool villain. But the idea that he is the false dreamer and that whole is just a really compelling and fascinating concept. The idea of Kim, the divine syllable, which is essentially the way Fudge Muppet, the YouTuber, puts it, is you to achieve Kim, it's sort of like a gnosis or an enlightenment where you understand that the world is the dream of a godhead. And the godhead is the causal source of all the divinities. So he's above and outside the Daedra and the Aedra, but also um, the primordial deities, the Anu and Padome, the chaotic forces of chaos and order. Um, he's before all that. He's the dreamer, and all this exists within his dream. And so you can intellectually assent to that and say, okay, yeah, we all live in a dream, right? But that wouldn't be a gnosis. And I think this also um, captures some of the ways that Morrowind's lore deals in a more complex way with religious ideas than a lot of other things would. It has a seems to have an understanding of that. So a gnosis, to achieve gnosis wouldn't be I just learn a thing. It'd be I take that thing into my being. I really, really internalize and understand it. So if the world is a dream, fundamentally, there's nothing real, and I really understand that, and all is one, then there is no I. And so to achieve Kim is again, as Fudge puts it, is to come to that ascent, and then there's a risk. If you fail to achieve Kim, then you zero sum, which means, oh my gosh, there is no I, all is one, boom, and you blurt out of existence. And it's as though you never were. Or the alternative is you understand that there is no you, all is one, and things that have parallels in real world religion, and you, by just sheer tyranny of will, assert no, I am anyway. I know I am not, but I am. And then through that, you achieve transcendence, and now you can interact with the world like a plaything. And so it's, yeah, it's just, it's got these extraordinarily novel ideas. And there's been, the reason it fascinates me is because I can take that idea of Kim, and there's been, I can't think of examples off the top of my head, but several times over the years where I'll be studying something in the real world and I'll be like, oh man, I wish I could cite Kim as a concept because it would be a useful thing to illuminate this. And so the reason it interests me is because it's sort of these fictional worlds that have this extraordinarily novel lore religiously end up creating these sort of conceptual structures, these little packets that can be exported in ways that it's hard to tell exactly why they're useful or why they're going to be useful, but they wind up proving to be useful later on, for me at least.
Okay, and how would you rate the religion in Morrowind to, say, religion in A Song of Ice and Fire, Game of Thrones,
Mm.
maybe Brandon Sanderson, if you're familiar with him, Star Trek or Stargate
Mm.
or whatever sci-fi fantasy you're familiar with?
Um, yeah, I mean, to be honest, I when I watched Star Trek Generation, I wasn't thinking as much about religion. Um, Song of Ice and Fire, I mean, obviously Jon Snow in at least in the show Game of Thrones, and I never read the books, he gets resurrected. So there's like this sort of direct interaction of the gods, and then people will reference the gods. Uh, I think it's much more. It's a little bit more grounded. You know, they have dragons and they have the dead coming back, and then you have obviously Jon Snow coming back. So it's not as though you don't see direct influence, but I think that there's more of the idea like there's a chance within this world that some of this stuff is baloney, which, that'd be kind of representative of how it's regarded in the real world. Whereas in Morrowind, there's there's differences in interpretation, and differences in what the underlying ontological truth is. There's no doubt in anybody's mind, I don't think, that no, the Daedra and Aedra exists and they are interacting with this world in extraordinarily direct ways. Because it's not just a vision that you tell somebody about. It's They will make appearances in Oblivion. You will see Daedra bust through the Oblivion gates and things like that. So I think it's just much more direct.
Okay, okay. So let's say I'm a just hypothetically a new writer, and
Hmm.
maybe I have a religious background, maybe I don't, but I want to have factor in religion into my stories. And I
Hmm.
just don't want it to be the chosen one prophecy or something just generic, a veneer for the culture, like religion is for the Klingons, warrior religion. I want
Hmm.
to have a meaningful religious element into my stories. What
Hmm.
advice would you have?
Well, I think the place I would start is with the advice from that YouTuber Religion for Breakfast. He says, have differences in opinion. Um, People don't always believe or interpret things in the same way. So have people, even if there is a monolithic truth, have the way people regard it and the interaction with it be different. So, you know, the people who are furthest in Morrowind from the tribunal, the Ashlanders, practice differently than they do if you're living right next to and under the nose of Vivek or something like that. Differences in practice, differences in belief, and I think that emerges from, and this is also where I think the novelty comes from, when you build the world out, uh, and you say, okay, here's how I'm going to structure it. The way those things interact, if you explore them earnestly and deeply, you will very often find something novel. And you can kind of guide that, right? Like Tolkien, he the barrier he put on himself is I can't make the Ainur, the powers, something that is just egregious to a Christian reader, right? I can't have that. So he had to make them somewhat amenable, and then obviously they're subservient to the true God who has the power of creation, the secret fire, which is Eru Iluvatar. So that's sort of his barrier. But I think if you build the world out structurally and then dig deep enough, the interactions, and then say, okay, what would a religious person do? The interactions and the myths themselves will kind of manifest more organically. And the more organic they are, I think the more compelling they are to readers and the more novel they become.
Speaking of organic growth, a lot of times it's hard for people to write, particularly individuals who are different than them. We see some authors just have cut out characters for them or people they know. If one is not particularly religious or just
Mhm.
doesn't factor in religion a lot, how can they make a realistic religious character or a character affected by religion?
Yeah, that's a good question. I forget who it was. There was a but there's somebody who I think they were talking about acting, but they said it's very hard to act as a character, and it might have even been a writer, so I'm mixing this up. It's very hard to act or write a character, whatever it was, that you hate. So I would say that the first step is try and put yourself in that person's shoes and say, you know, I don't think fundamentally they're a dum dum. If I were to write an atheistic character or a new age character, I might have through, you know, years and years come to the conclusion. I think that their ideas are wrong, um, and maybe even I think dumb. I wouldn't say that, and I don't think that. But if I were to write about them, I would say, okay, well, how can I think about them in a charitable way? Try to understand how they came to this conclusion and what would it take for me to have come to that conclusion. And I think if you can't do that and you're resentful, you're going to end up with a character that everybody knows they're meant to not like, and it will come off like a straw man. Um, so yeah, that'd be my thought there.
Okay. So what's next for you in your life?
Yeah, so obviously the Philip K. Dick book, The Esoteric Theology of Philip K. Dick, is coming out in January. It's done. Everything's out of my hands, but it's coming out. Um, I'm waiting to hear back from publisher for the Zelda and Religion volume. Um, and other than that, yeah, I mean, finishing out my dissertation, it's going well, and some of the cognitive science and religion research is interesting and compelling, and I'm very much into that. And we'll see. But as I kind of prepared for this interview and started to think about like the why religion and fiction was interesting, I really want to do something with that idea of like conceptual packets that can be generalized elsewhere, but I don't know what. So that's my hope, is to figure out something to do with that idea, because I don't. It's different than. It's not like a necessarily a Jungian or a Campbellian type of analysis where you just are looking for a monomythic account. It's not. It's similar conceptually, but not exactly the same methodologically as something like looking for the seed of the word, or Javier Velasquez on Substack calls them the logos grammaticos, the idea that the word is kind of embedded everywhere. It's not exactly the same as that, and so I'm trying to figure out what to do with that idea because I find it compelling, um, and I know there's something, but I don't know what yet. So
So I know a lot of my readers are into Philip Dick, and I know a lot of my readers are into Zelda, and I would be doing you a disservice and them a disservice if I didn't give you a few minutes just to sell those books that are coming out. Go.
yeah, yeah. So the esoteric theology of Philip K. Dick is Bloomsbury, and it's an edited volume, so it's an anthology of scholars. Um, Within the Philip K. Dick space, and there's not a lot of Philip K. Dick scholars, so it'll be familiar names. Um, and we have a variety of accounts, some looking at specific fictional stories within his corpus. Obviously, Do Androids Dream is going to be commonly referenced. Ubik. Um, you're going to hear a lot of references to the Valis trilogy, but there's some kind of lesser discussed topics like the Three Stigmata Palmer Eldritch. And but if those who don't know, Phil Dick, I mean, he's an extraordinarily prolific science fiction writer. If you guys watch Blade Runner, I think you get the show The Man in the High Castle. Matt Damon was in the Adjustment Bureau, you have Minority Report. All these things are coming from the mind of Philip K. Dick. But he actually, in 1974, had an ecstatic experience where he saw a girl delivering his medicine after surgery, and she was wearing a golden necklace that had an ichthys on it, the Christian fish. And he said, "What's that?" Well, it's something that early Christians used to wear. And boom, pink beam of light hit him, and he received a revelation. And he spent essentially the rest of his life unpacking that revelation. So as much as he wrote a ton, I mean, a ton of fiction. He wrote a ton of exegetical papers, and many of them are not yet transcribed. So you have the Exegesis of Philip K. Dick, which is like 1,100 pages. But even that didn't capture the full extent of his exegetical work. He had um, millions of words of notes. And so I'm, there it's a collect. If you guys want to participate too, Gabe McKee, you can reach out to him. You can start to transcribe some of Philip K. Dick's handwritten notes that have yet to be transcribed. But he spent most of his life just exploring that. So if in some of your favorite sci-fi, there is an exploration of themes uh, that he would deem to be themselves religious and revelatory, even if they were written before his revelation, he believed that their origin was he retroactively came to believe that they were prophetic and were being revealed to him to lead up to that revelation. And then the Zelda volume is Zelda and Religion. Got a group of authors, the same thing, another edited volume. I pitched it to a publisher. I'm waiting to hear back, and we have some backup publishers in mind. Um, but yeah, it's another group of scholars, and it's going to be exploring various religious themes within Zelda. Now, this is the Philip K. Dick volume is me and Dr. George Sieg were co-editors. The Zelda volume is just me. And one of the things I really wanted to capture, because it came through with Philip K. Dick, but it doesn't always come through in some of these pop culture and whether it be pop culture and philosophy, pop culture and religion, is, and this is something I told the authors, um, I wanted it to kind of emerge organically and be something more appealing to fans of the franchise. So the the editor of the Blackwell's Pop Culture and Philosophy, um, the series editor, he explicitly says that like this scholars in like literature, for example, they kind of take their job too seriously. If you're trying to say, hey, there's philosophy, you can teach philosophy. You can use fiction as a pedagogical tool to teach philosophical concepts too complex to be taught otherwise to the general public. That's good. If you're trying to say, here's the philosophy I found within fiction, you're taking your job too serious. I'm not trying to like besmirch him. These are I'm paraphrasing. This is pretty much what he says. Um, that's not what we're trying to do here. I'm not coming here to tell you that South Park is a bunch of philosophers. Um, I told the contributors to the Zelda volume, I said, we're doing the exact opposite. In the same way that I thought Philip K. Dick was a legitimate theologian and a legitimate mystic, I think that there is legitimate religious exploration within Zelda. So I'm not looking to do uh, an eisegetical effort of reading in and using Zelda as a pedagogical tool for whatever. That's so we're taking the exact opposite approach. Nothing against those other approaches. I think they're compelling and interesting. I read those books, but that's just the approach I want to take. So I think that's what makes it unique is that I'm really trying to emphasize for the contributors, make it something that the fans wouldn't feel as though they're being simply taught about some external system, but is emerging from, even if you then do comparative religion afterward. So
That's really interesting. If people wanted to know more about that, where could they find your works, or either your Substack or a bookstore?
so the Philip K. Dick volume you can find on Amazon. You can pre-order it right now. Uh, I don't know where else Bloomsbury is going to stock it. Zelda, it's still in the works, so I would just follow my Substack for updates as I get them. I will continue to update the world about it. Um, yeah, so my Substack would be probably a good place to go.
And what else do you put on your Substack?
Uh, I've got two newsletters. The Myth and Oasis one is kind of very broad. It's a bit eclectic. So a lot of it I talk about pop culture, some of it I talk about religion, some of it I talk about just cultural events. It's somewhat heavy on postmodern Baudrillard style influence, um, but broadly speaking, I characterize it as religious exploration, even if it's not always obvious how so. And then my text and tradition is a lot more grounded in its history and theology. Usually, it's going to be church history or um, s- textual criticism of some, usually the Bible and things like that. So those are my two newsletters. But the main one is going to be the Myth and Oasis, and it's a bit eclectic.
Okay. Any last things for our listeners?
Um, no, I mean, Patrick, it was really great to get to, talk to you and to talk to you live. I know we've interacted several times, so I really appreciate you having me on here. And yeah, I hopefully I wasn't too rabbit trail-ish, but I really appreciate you talking to me.
Not a problem at all. I had a great time, and I look forward to just reading your stuff. And this is just an offer. Think about it. If you and the crew, once the Zelda thing is getting closer, want to do something kind of the both talking about the Zelda work itself and also maybe what authors and other creatives can pull inspiration from, your thoughts on religion and Zelda, that'd be fascinating too.
Oh, I'd love that. Yeah, definitely. Let's keep in touch, and I'd love to talk about that.
Awesome. You have a great day.
You too. Thank you.